Hi there, and welcome to the 28th episode of Career Stories Live. And today I'm joined by Ian Bickers, who is Prison Group Director at London Prisons. Hi, Ian.
Hi, how are you?
Good, thank you. Thank you for joining.
It's a pleasure.
So Ian was my excellent manager at Prudential in 2000, and we got back in touch about a year or so ago, I think. So thank you for coming on today, and it's really great to see you. So anyone that's watching, please do comment to let us know that you're here, where you're joining from. Feel free to ask any questions, share your experience in the comments, and if you're watching on replay, leave comments and we'll respond later. So the basis for these lives, for anyone that's not seen them before, I've just always been really interested in what people do, why they do them, and I'm just like learning about different roles and career paths. So this one's definitely going to be interesting talking to Ian. I've definitely not had anyone like this on before. So the aim really is to inspire thought about what people could do in their career and give advice, places to source information, etc. So with all that in mind, Ian, can you give us a brief intro into you and what it is you're doing right now?
Yeah. As you said, Ian Bickers, I'm the Prison Group Director for London Prisons. What does that mean in real terms? So I am responsible for 6 adult male prisons across the capital city of London. We look after around 8,500 prisoners in those 6 establishments. I manage a team of around about 3,500 staff through sort of a senior leadership team in each prison. So the governing governor reports into me in each of those 6 prisons. I suppose from a scale perspective, just to help people understand, we have about £150 million worth of budget that helps us to execute that. And our primary task is to help the justice system run smoothly, keep prisoners in prison safely and securely, but also look to rehabilitate them as well. So a real mixed bag of opportunity.
Yeah, we were just talking backstage about the variety. It sounds like it is a massive amount of variety you're dealing with.
Yeah, you never get a boring day in this job. Never get a boring day.
So as well as leading 3,500 people, you've got the whole prison population as well to be thinking about.
Yeah, and it's really interesting because that roughly equates to around about 10% of the prison population across the English and Welsh system. So we manage a fairly big chunk, and of course we have this dual role as a leader. My responsibilities to my staff group, absolutely, their safety, their development, their growth, the promotion opportunities that you would expect within any organisation. But charged with 8,500 souls as well, and our job predominantly is split in 2 halves. One which is about serving the courts to make sure that the men that we hold get out into courts to make sure that justice is done for victims, but also for them as well. So we spend quite a lot of time obviously helping to facilitate that. But we also have a rehabilitative role as well. I've often said that the people I'm holding in custody will become your neighbour. And therefore we have a responsibility to make sure that we can rehabilitate the men and women in custody the best we possibly can to come back as good citizens within the community.
Yeah, okay. We'll talk about more of that later, I'm sure. So Paul's just saying he's sat around the corner as usual, so thank you. Okay, so early careers. I've started asking people about this now. So did you have a job whilst you were at school? If you did, what was it? Has it helped you in any way?
Yeah, so I've pretty much been working since I was 13. I was one of those people in the generation where you could do a paper round when you were 13, and but unbelievably, I had 3 paper rounds when I was 13, and sort of pretty much kept that going until I left school. It was just the ability to be able to get out and earn some money and be able to be a little bit more independent and not have to think about sort of money from parents and stuff like that. Getting up early has been a thing that I've always done. I still do it now. In the nature of the work that we do, we start our days very early in prisons, as you can imagine. Has it helped me? I think absolutely has given me, or gave me really early on, sort of a level of work ethic, which was about getting up and doing a job. And in some ways being there till you're finished, because a paper round is important for lots of people who want to receive their morning papers, or evening papers, as one of the rounds was. And I think it sort of taught me a bit about discipline and getting up, and the money was important to me at that point in my life for lots of other reasons, which I won't bore you with now, but I needed to earn a little bit of cash to be independent. And I think that really drove a sort of bit of a work ethos and as I say, some discipline about going out and working and earning some money.
Yeah, definitely. I had a paper round. I had 2 paper rounds. So I had one that was a paid paper and one that was a free paper. And the paid paper one, I think, did teach me quite a lot, because obviously you had to keep records of who'd paid and all of that kind of stuff. And almost every week there were people pretending they weren't in because they couldn't afford to pay for the paper that week. So I think you do quite a lot about people as well and how they get out of things.
Yeah.
So we've got a couple of comments. So Kine, I don't know how, saying hello, and Manish. So thank you for joining. It's very nice of you. Okay, so your career then, once you'd finished your education, how did you start and when did you start?
So I left school at 16 with no qualifications whatsoever. There's a whole story there, but again, probably don't need to bore you with some of that stuff. But I grew up in a household where, in some ways, education wasn't important, and so left at 16 and joined the army. And 4 months later, having joined the army with the view of doing a technical trade apprenticeship, I got medically discharged because I damaged my left knee. Wasn't fit to stay in the army. And literally came out on a Friday, and on the Monday went to the local job centre, and on the Monday afternoon was interviewed for a job as an administrator for a mortgage brokers, and basically got the job, started the following day. And 3 months later, this really bizarre thing happened where the police turned up to the office to arrest somebody who was a mortgage advisor for mortgage fraud. And the guy was walked out of the office in handcuffs, never to be seen again. And the manager of the office called me in and said, "Do you drive?" And I said, "Yes." So he threw me a set of car keys and said, "Right, that's your new company car. And on Monday, we're going to train you to be a mortgage advisor and you're going to be taking over his client base." To which I was a bit like 17 at that point in time. Wow. Never even thought about doing any of that sort of stuff. And so quite literally fell into a career selling financial services, which I did for about 9 years. And then made a transition, having sort of done quite a lot of corporate work into the learning development space. And so trained new entrant consultants in sort of the financial services sector, and built a career over 11 years, which culminated in switching sectors between financial services and retail, and went to work for Dixon Stores Group as their national learning and training development manager within the PC World business, as it was at that point in time. Yeah. So yeah, it's been an interesting career dynamic because there's a shift into then working for the civil service. So yeah, that's how it all started, really.
Really good. So the army, did you, apart from being medically discharged, did you like the whole way of the structure and the discipline and all that kind of stuff in the army life?
Yeah, I think the thing with it was I grew up in a household that was a little bit disjointed and a little bit of other stuff that was going on in it, and so for me it was an escape from that. And so I was really desperate to be a Metropolitan Police officer. And I'd had a dream as a sort of 13, 14-year-old child. I wanted to go into the Metropolitan Police and be a dog handler. And the challenge with that was that at the time you needed to have 5 GCSEs or 5 O levels, because I'm that old, we did O levels then. You needed 5 O levels, including English and maths. And as I've just said, I left school with nothing. I think the thing that helped me was I went to a careers convention one evening at school in my 5th year at school. And as I walked into the hall, the army were there advertising for military police officers. And so I went and spoke to them. They said, "You need to go to the local recruitment office," which I did. They gave me a test to do, which they would do, obviously, an entrance test. And when I sat down with the guy who was the recruiter, he basically said to me, "Your results have blown us away. In simple terms, you can do anything you want in the army apart from fly helicopters."
Wow.
So I said, "Well, I'd like to be a military policeman." And he went, "No, you're not going to be a military policeman. You're going to go and do an apprenticeship, young man." And so I was sort of bullied into going and doing a technical apprenticeship. But I liked the structure. I liked the discipline of it. I liked the belonging that came with it. Again, a lot of that stuff was potentially missing. My home life. And so for me, I was like 22 years, that was me, that's what I was going to do, travel the world, see the world, and enjoy it that way. But as I say, that came to me quite quickly.
So Paul's just saying, what a story, different times, Ian, with the interview one day, start work the next.
Yes, exactly,
definitely
very different.
Okay, so Prudential's, obviously that's where we met. So I think you just turned up one day as a new manager and out of nowhere. I think then I was just adopted into the team, but it was a great time. I was managing the graduate program and you pretty much just left me to it, which was what I loved and why I thought you were such an amazing manager, I think.
Thank you.
It was very good. Okay, so the switch from the Pru to the Dixon's group, how did that come about?
So I basically got to a point in my career where I was struggling to be able to sort of build my career beyond the level that I was working in. And I think that when I look back retrospectively now, there were two bits of advice that I was given by recruiters who said there's two things that are missing in your CV. One is you don't have a degree. And if you want to move beyond your current role, you need a qualification to be able to do that. And as Paul said, different times in the late 90s.
Yeah.
And also, you need to change sector, because what you're just doing is going through the process of doing financial services, financial services, financial services.
Yeah.
And so I made a very deliberate ploy to do two things at that point in time, which was to start a degree and also move sector. So I started to look for sort of a cross-sector experience where I could take my learning development experience, which obviously had come to a peak at the Pru, and move that into a different sector, which is when I then found the job working within Dixon's. But it was driven out of real necessity because I was ambitious and I wanted to move my career on. But it was a real shock in many ways to have thought that, you know, pretty much at that point in my career, I'd probably been working for 15 years and it'd never been a blocker for me, not having a degree, not having any different sector experience, but to sort of think about that more senior role was a real shift for me into thinking about what I did. So I dealt with the job thing first. So I shifted jobs and sector and then went on to then start a degree from there. So that was what predicated that. And it was just, you know, really a thing about necessity rather than anything else.
Yeah. Okay. So that was going to be one of my questions about your degree in psychology. So it was in psychology, wasn't it, for the Open University?
Yeah,
so how did you, like, in practical terms, how did you manage your time to be able to do that? So new job and a degree, and the degree was done in the normal amount of time that someone studying full time would do.
Yeah. So I was really lucky. Whilst I was at the Pru, you know, you remember we had a great overall leader that was, you know, very, very, very keen to help us grow and develop. And I managed to qualify whilst I was at the Pru with my Chartered Institute of Personnel and Development qualifications. That in itself was a bit of a bonus because that meant I was able to take that qualification into the sort of prior accredited learning aspect of the way the Open University works, which was lucky because it took my part-time degree from 6 years down to 4. So that was great. So, you know, there's a lesson there in the sense of learning to embed qualifications as you go through your career, which, you know, are helpful for your job right now, but might also be helpful for another reason later on as well. And I still use that qualification in the job that I do today in many ways. My mantra has always been just get it done. I think that's a little bit about, you know, that early point that you talk about paper rounds and working for the army. I have a personality type that hates the pressure of having to wait to do something or looking to do something. So when someone says to me, you can self-study with the Open University, you can do it at your own pace. For me, it was about, you know, and I had 3 young kids at the time as well, which was also the challenge. It was about making sure I put dedicated time apart. I'm very, very lucky in that I have a very supportive wife who knew that this was important to me for career development and was able to say to me, what do you need? And what I needed was 2 evenings a week, and it became a Tuesday and a Thursday evening and half a day on a Saturday. And I literally scheduled my study in and around those times. And so if I was on a train, I might read some stuff or I might do a bit of research. But I knew that if I could follow that discipline process through, that I would be able to get my study done in the 4 years that, you know, I set out to achieve it. There was nothing worse in my head than having to think to study longer than I absolutely needed to. So the plan was to do the 4 years. My wife, as I say, brilliantly supported me for that 4-year period in that time that I needed. And it was just the discipline of getting on with it. And I know it might sound a bit sad now. When I look back, it probably is a bit sad now, but I even used to use that time if I was on holiday. So, you know, if I was in the study year, which with the Open University was February to October, if we were on holiday at that point, I would still do my reading and stuff during that period of time. So that's the discipline, I suppose, that came into that.
Yeah, no, that's good. That's really good. Excellent. Okay. Really inspirational, I think, to have that, and that level of discipline is really incredible. I don't think there's many people that are that rigid with it, so you can see why you actually achieved that.
But there's also a really interesting thing as well, Sarah, that comes out of that, which is now I'm forever saying to young people, do your study early, get it done. There's nothing harder than when you're 32, which is what I was when I started, and you've got a young family. My eldest was 10 at the time, so I had a 10-year-old an 8-year-old and a 6-year-old, there is nothing harder than trying to study for a degree and bring up 3 kids and, you know, maintain your marriage and everything else that you need to do. So, study hard young children is why, you know, if I go to schools to do talking or you know, university, I always say to people now, that's my journey. It doesn't need to be yours, you know. So.
No, that's true. And I think going back to what you said about the supportive manager at the Pru, and it's the same for me. So he funded me to do my CIPD qualification and get a degree in learning development. And like you say, that's what then, well, in my case, enabled me to go freelance, which I did a couple of years later. So yeah, it's great to have those networks. And I think actually also, so I know when you went to Dixon's, you then got one of our colleagues in, didn't you, to work freelance for you on one of the training programs? So kind of shows the importance of the network as well, doesn't it?
Yes, absolutely, yeah. And you know, and again, I haven't realised the benefit of that again until really recently. And, you know, again, that having a live network and keeping people around you that you know that you can trust, who will do great work for you, really important just to think about how you can continue to sort of, you know, not just build your career, but, you know, the things that I can leverage now through a network, which has now become an international network because of some of the voluntary work I do, really, really important. And you're right, you can't underestimate some of that stuff.
Yeah, excellent. Okay, so the move into prison service then, how did that role come about?
So this is linked to doing a psychology degree. So I'd come to that conclusion that I needed to do a degree to progress my career, and then thought, well, if I'm going to do this, I want to do something that I find interesting. And I'd always been fascinated by people. At that point in time, you know, I'd qualified to be able to be able to test with psychometrics.
Yeah,
I always found psychology fascinating, and so decided to do a psychology degree. But halfway through that, which was I'm trying to think, about a year before I left PC World, I just started to get to a point where I wanted to use my psychology in a career. And so I started to do some research and had determined that of the 7 strands of psychology that, you know, you could go and work in and qualify with a master's, I wanted to be a forensic psychologist. And my research told me that 98%, and it's still pretty much the same now, but 98% of forensic psychologists work for the prison service. So I reached out to my local prison, which just so happens to be a high security prison, and met the lead psychologist there, who, you know, went through great pains to get me security clearance to go into the prison. And she sat me down and said, look, you know, if you want to be a forensic psychologist, this is the place to do it. But my advice to you would be to get a job working for the prison service before you qualify with your psychology degree, because prisons are a bit unique and you'll either love it or you'll hate it. And if you hate it and you've qualified as a forensic psychologist, you're not going to, you know, you're going to have wasted some time.
Good advice, yeah.
It was really good advice. And so at the end, or during my second year of study, I applied for a job which at the time was called a head of learning and skills. So it was transferable in the sense that it was about offender learning and offender vocational training. And I was able to basically apply my, you know, extensive 9 years worth of learning and development career into that space. So I'm not an educationalist, and this is about education. But I was really fortunate that I was interviewed by a really forward-thinking governor who said, you know, look, you know, you're not an educationalist, but boy, let's take you in. You know, private sector experience always goes down well in the civil service. And so I joined the civil service, prison service, predominantly on the 6th of January 2004. And that was how I made the transition. And my view was, having got to the end of my second year at that point in time, that I would spend another 2 years finishing my degree whilst I, you know, learned the prison service for 2 years. And then if I liked it, I would then qualify for as a forensic, I'd go on to do qualifications of forensic psychology. But really interestingly, 3 months after joining, I'd made such an impact in such a quick period of time, because I brought all this private sector experience in, that my boss's boss, who I had never met in my life before, pitched up to my office and came in and shut the door, didn't even introduce himself, and said, the governor of the prison tells me that you're excellent. I want you to go on this cross-hierarchical scheme that will put you into the operational line, and in 10 years' time, you could be running your own prison. And I'm like, who are you? so it was a bit like, you know, don't know who you are, never seen you before. And so I had this conversation with this guy who became a really strong mentor for me and a real advocate of me, and has really helped me in my career. And I remember going home that night, and it is still vivid now, where I phoned my wife, who at that point in time was like petrified that I worked in a prison. and said, I'm still alive and everything's fine, but I've met this right idiot today who thinks I could be running a prison in 10 years' time. And she went, well, talk to me about it then. So we talked about it when I got home. Anyway, very long story short, I then, in the September of my first year, applied for an internal graduate program. 1,000 applicants. They took on 80 people a year. I was fortunate enough to win a space on that. I then went off to do prison officer training, and literally about 20 months after I joined the prison service, I was walking the landings of HMP Wood Hill, which was the very same high security jail that I'd gone into to see the psychologist as a prison officer, dealing with some of the toughest prisoners in the system. Thinking to myself, I didn't really think that this would ever be a thing. And I was pushed through that very quickly because they maintained my sort of senior manager status. I'd come in as a senior non-operational senior manager, and they maintained that for me because I wasn't able to take the pay cut because of kids and all the other sorts of things to be able to transition. And, you know, was lucky that in some ways I was able to do sort of a 3-year graduate program in about 18 months, qualified at the end of that, and then became a qualified operational manager within the prison system. And quite literally 7 years to the day that I joined the prison service on the 6th of January 2013. 6 years after 7 years after I qualified as a prison officer, I was running my own prison.
Wow.
So yeah, that's how it came about. I wanted to be a forensic psychologist.
Yeah.
I finished my psychology degree. I didn't go on to do a master's in forensic psychology, but yeah, I was so enthralled then by prisons and what we could do within them that's my career has then been in the operational delivery line ever since.
Amazing. So he obviously spotted something in you that you had never even considered.
Never even considered it. And as I say, he was a really strong advocate for me all the way through my career. You know, I think it's really important. You know, the one lesson I learned there is about talent spotting people. So I do it all the time now. I'm really thoughtful about trying to spot the future. You know, so I've got people who I mentor who have done 3, 4, 5 years service with the prison service, may have come in on graduate schemes, may not have done, but really something about them. And we try now to, in London specifically, put some real work into helping those people grow and develop, because they will be the future of the prison service beyond my retirement.
Yeah, that's good. And I've noticed you've picked up, you keep saying that you're lucky, which I don't think it's not necessarily luck, is it? I think you've clearly worked very hard, but also you've taken those opportunities. And I know from my past, when I was offered things before that I've taken, and other people had turned them down because they didn't want to change or whatever. So it does take something to actually take that jump sometimes.
Yeah.
Is this going to work?
Yeah, it's a bit of bravery sometimes, isn't it? About bravery in your own ability, or just a bit of confidence, which I suppose helps as well sometimes.
Yeah. So you said you didn't do your master's in psychology, but you did do a master's. So tell me about that. What was that all about?
Yeah, so the prison service has a sort of affiliation with Cambridge University. So Cambridge has a world-renowned criminology department, and prison service will send 6 people a year to that, and we have an internal application process if you want to apply for it. And they look to sort of aspiring deputy governors and governors really as their pool, and it's a bit about internal talent growth and development. So me being the necky person I am, I just turned around. I thought about 2013. I thought I'd been appointed as a governor at that point in time. I was the governor at HMP Highdown, but having been to the Open University. And, you know, the Open University has a brilliant reputation, and I will not hear a bad word said against it. But my experience of university is very different to going to a physical institution of a university. And so a couple of people have said to me, oh, you should apply for Cambridge. I think you'd be really good at it. And I was a bit like, no, I'm not clever enough to get to Cambridge. You know, I left school with no qualifications. I'm not clever enough to do that. Anyway, the person in my life who is probably the one who kicks me up the backside the most, my wife, said, apply for it. Because if you don't apply for it, you'll never know. And that's so true. So I applied for it and went through the process, and again got a place. I was nearly said that lucky enough to get a place on that. Yeah, stop that. But got a place, won a place on that, and went off to Cambridge, and was in awe of the fact that my eldest son was in his last year of his undergraduate degree at Cambridge in the first year that I was there doing my master's. So there is this overlap that both he and I have, where we both attended Cambridge at the same time, which was just a wonderful experience. And I remember being in absolute awe of being a student at Cambridge, B, being even thought about in the sense of being good enough to go and do this, but also that my supervisor is somebody that I've held in great esteem, who has written lots and lots of academic work around the prison system. And he was my supervisor for my master's. And I remember him saying to me, what do you want to achieve out of your master's qualification? And I said, I would like to get a distinction in my qualification and also publish an academic paper as a result of the work I'm going to do here. And he laughed at me at that point in time. And if we had more time and I told you about my childhood, you'd realise that that was probably the wrong thing to do, because that's a real motivator for me.
Right. Okay.
He said, you won't do either of those two things. We give out 1 or 2 distinctions a year, and we only publish 1 or 2 academic papers every 2 or 3 years from master students. Okay, fine.
Yeah.
And I came out of my master's degree having got a distinction and also published an academic paper off the back of it 3 years later. So my lesson is that do not take no for an answer. And that was the motivation I needed. When someone tells me I can't do something, you can always do something. There's always a way. And it was hard work and it was a lot of study. But yeah, that was how I did it. And it was a part-time master's that was a combination of 6 weeks a year there, so 3 chunks of 2 weeks. But a lot of that, again, being built in and around sort of everyday life. Kids had left home at that point. Most of them had left home at that point in time. It sounds like I've got a brood of them. There's 3. So that was easier to do. And again, support from my wife, who was just able to say, go and do it, go and enjoy it. You'll love every second of it. I know what you like. She says that learning is my hobby. So yeah, it was a great thing to do.
Oh, that's really cool. I went to Cambridge recently for the first time. I've never been in my 50 years, but it's amazing. I was just looking at the universities thinking, well, it's almost wasted on the 18-year-olds that come here.
Yeah, I get that.
Okay, so you mentioned voluntary work earlier on. So what kind of things have you done in a voluntary capacity?
So a couple of things which I think have been sort of in some ways quite career enhancing as well. So I've been a school governor at 3 different schools, and again, I don't pick easy schools to do that in, because I quite like the challenge of finding difficult things to sort of help get better. I've done voluntary work in the sense of helping to sort of write guidelines for NICE, for example. So I've written NICE guidelines. And I think over and above my day job, I'm a commissioner for the City and Guilds Foundation, because they like to give money away to prison service charities. So I work as a commissioner from them, which is a voluntary piece of work. But I think the biggest thing that I do is to go to the US a couple of times a year, where I help teach prison wardens, so prison governors in our language, to be better and more inspirational leaders. And it's a fascinating piece of work, because of course everyone looks at the American criminal justice system and looks at the warehousing that happens with the 2.5 million citizens they have locked up. And what we're trying to do is to create a really rehabilitative culture within some of the US system. So I've been doing that for about the last 5 years. I sit as part of their advisory panel now. So they asked me to bring a bit of an international perspective to the world that they work in and how they do that. And it's a real privilege to be able to go out there a couple of times a year, to be able to sort of share some of my experience over the last 20 years and help them think about how they can grow their organisations.
Yeah, that's really good. And I'm often telling people that I'm working with, voluntary work is so important, because it can go on your CV, you can use it in your interview questions, all of that. And particularly if you're out of work, you know.
Yeah, and I think the thing for me, Sarah, is that when you work in the prison service, it's very command and control. So, as the prison group director, if I say I want something doing, it sort of gets done because of the nature of the work in which we do. And that's not always healthy, because I see people that can potentially abuse that authority level. And I think one of the things, if you go and do things like school governors or committee type work, trustee work in a charity, I've done a couple of trustee roles, you have to work in a very different way as well. So it's not just about what you might be able to put back. It's also about the learning to work in a different way. You have to be very collaborative. You have to be very consultative. I can't use my hierarchical position or authority in a setting like that. And I think that makes me a better leader in my day job. I think that doing that type of stuff, yes, it puts back something into the communities, of course, but I think it brings a different dynamic to the work we do as well. So I think there's lots of benefits for doing stuff like that.
That leads me on to my next question, which was about you always being a really inspirational leader. And you've mentioned that that's what you're trying to do with the voluntary work. So what advice do you give to people who want to move into a leadership role?
So I think the one thing that it took me a little bit to work out as a leader is what I wanted to be as a leader. And one of the things, so somebody said to me the other day, I'm thinking about applying for a promotion, and somebody said to me the other day, what's your biggest weakness? And I said, my imposter syndrome. And they went, no, that's your biggest strength, because what that does is makes you a humble leader. And when you turn that weakness into a strength, you think, actually, yeah, I can see why that might be the case.
Yeah.
And I think it took me a little bit of a while to work out what I wanted to be as a leader. And all I can say really about this is that I bring me to work. I bring me as an authentic leader to work. And I think being authentic about what you do and how you do it is hugely important. I think, some of the skill sets that you can have is about, I would often, as a prison governor, for example, I would often go and be a prison officer. I'd do searching in reception in the morning at 6 o'clock, so get in early to just see how the guys were doing. I would go and issue the canteen or medication. And, when push comes to shove, your staff stand up beside you. So, I got quite a tough time because we were trying to prosecute a prison mutiny. And we weren't successful at that. And there's quite a lot of bad press about prison governor trying to do something that then ended up not being the case. And my staff stood beside me, and they demonstrated the reasons why this was really important. And actually, that inspiration that you can provide to other people to be the best they possibly can, I think, is important. And I think it's a craft. I think it's difficult to learn leadership. You can learn lots of stuff about negotiation skills and collaboration and partnership working and all the things that we know are important, but it's a practice, and it's about working out how to do that in a really authentic way that puts people at the center of everything we do. So everything I do considers the people at the center of it. And I don't make changes to our organization. I'm too far removed from the front line now to be able to think about what it is. So if we think we need to change something, we go and ask prison officers, or we go and ask the administrators that are doing the work, and we get them to start thinking about how they design and develop it. Because as I say, I'm too far removed from that now, and that's how we then bring people with us on that journey. So I suppose that's what I'd say.
Yeah, no, that's really good. And it's similar to what Jenny, who was on last week, so she's head of customer experience at a retirement company, and she was saying that for her, becoming a good leader goes back to her knowing more about herself and understanding more about herself. And that sounds kind of similar to what you've just said.
Yeah, and I think, do I know how to be the best prison officer now? No, I don't. If you said to me, give me a view on X, Y, or Z, I would probably struggle to be able to do some of the technical stuff now. But I don't get paid to do that. I get paid to inspire and take people on a journey. And I think that's really important. I absolutely agree with Jenny's comments there.
Yeah. Okay. So John's in Chicago. He was my guest on week 2 of Career Stories. So he's saying what a great insight into volunteering. So thanks, John, for joining. So I know it's early for you. And Paul is saying, random question, but related to one of the current roles. Are you aware of the Boats Not Bars initiatives run by Fulham Reach Boat Club?
Yes, I am. Yeah. So in my previous role, so I was responsible before I took up the prison group director role in London. I was responsible for rolling out a national strategy around education and work. And one of the guys I had in my senior team was responsible for all of the prison service industries, catering, and also PE. And Jason Swetnam was actively involved in basically bringing Fulham Reach and a couple of other rowing clubs in. So yeah, absolutely. Something that, again, really inspiring for the guys to be able to do something different around this. And John McAvoy, who people might know, life a prisoner, who was spotted by a prison officer, PE prison officer in prison, was released he was on a whole life terrace, was released from prison because of the potential he showed. And that came out of some of the work that Paul's talking about there. So yeah, really important about how we make those links between the work the guys do in prisons, the work they do with prisoners, and how that can impact on lives. And John goes and talks inspirationally about that journey he's been on, how that changed his life.
Yeah, that's amazing. So Paul works at the River and Row Museum in Henley. I'm guessing that's where.
Right. Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
Great. Okay. So loads more questions and not enough time. So let's go. So values. So I mentioned before, everyone that's come on has ended up talking about their values in some way. So do your personal values have an impact on the type of organisation or role that you'll take on?
Do you know what? It's a really good question, because I think over my life, and as I've got older, for me, what has become really important is the values of the organisation that I work for, and importantly, the values of the person that I work for.
Yeah.
Sometimes those things can be a little bit at odds. You know, there is nothing glamorous about locking up 8,500 men across London by any stretch of imagination.
Mm.
What I think my values do is it drives the way that I do my work, and importantly, it drives the outcome for the staff group that I'm responsible for and the prisoner group that we look after. And sometimes those are at odds with the prison service, because the prison service is a government department and it gets constrained by a whole host of stuff. But I think, you know, we are a values-based organisation, and it allows me to, as I said earlier, bring my whole self to work and the values that I hold important. So about public service, about being a servant leader, about making sure that we're providing opportunities for people to return back to communities. And, you know, I genuinely feel very privileged to be able to lead the 6 prisons in London and have the impact that we can have as well. And it's interesting, when I talk to colleagues, I've got a very good friend who I met the very first day I joined the prison service, and she left about 10 years ago, and I bumped into a meeting on Monday, and she just said, I still 10 years later miss the buzz of the difference that we make in prisons. And I think that's a really interesting facet, that people do this because it's a values-based organisation, values-based job, and people can make a difference to it. So yeah.
Okay, good. Okay, so you've mentioned about civil service in general. So have you got any advice for people who are looking to get into the civil service? I mean, it could be specific to prison service, but any in general, really. So for either apprentice, graduate, more mature candidates, what's
So I laugh when I say this. You don't do it for the money. For people who have come out of university with good degrees. My son's fiance, my oldest son's fiance, they met at university. She's just joined the civil service on the civil service fast stream program, and with her qualifications and experience, she would definitely earn more money in industry. So there is a point about, I think, people join the civil service because of the values that they bring to it.
Yeah.
I think that what I would say is that be really clear about what it is you want to do. You know, I talk to a lot of people that say, well, I just want to help people. Well, what does that mean? You know, if you want to help people, you might want to be a doctor or a nurse. You might want to be, you know, working in customer services. What does it genuinely mean? And I think people are really motivated by sort of individual things that are important to them. So for me, I wanted to join the prison service because I wanted to be a forensic psychologist. And I wanted to be a forensic psychologist because I find that motivation that people have about crime really interesting. I used to do loads of reading about it before I joined the service, before I studied. So I think, you know, justice felt like a natural fit for me. There are some people that are passionate about housing or food or education. And it's about pick the right stream and work for the right department. Don't just join any government department in a hope that you'll find a slot. Find what you're passionate about. There's 27, I think 28 different government departments out there, and focus and have a focus about the things you want to do. We don't need everybody to join through a fast tracks process or a graduate program. There's loads and loads of jobs that will have loads of influence. And I think, you know, having the passion to want to affect change for people is the thing that would be there. And I think the great thing about the civil services is that we are trying to lead the revolution around apprenticeships. You know, and I've seen people who, you know, later on in their careers have gone on to do MBAs, have done degrees, have done master's qualifications, have done very specific finance or HR related qualifications. So it's a great place to come and learn. It's a great place to grow. And it's a great place to be able to help society become better at what we do as well. So I think be really specific about what you're interested in, target that, and register on the Civil Service Jobs website, because you will never see jobs randomly advertised. You have to be really registered in a way that gives you the sense of what you're looking to do.
Yeah, and I think the recruitment process is quite long, isn't it? I know my brother went for DWP, and even after the offer, it was still a considerable amount of time before he actually
be patient. It's a really good point that you made, Sarah, because you don't want to be on a burning platform if you want a job in the civil service. You have to be able to think about the fact that this is maybe a planned job that you do. But again, people can join the civil service at all levels. You know, I came in at a sort of relatively senior level when I joined the prison service because of the experience that I brought into it. So, you know, this isn't about everyone has to start a career and work their way through. You know, yeah, there'll be people that will be able to come in as director at director level, you know, a grade above me. So yeah, lots of opportunities.
Yeah, and I guess I know from other people that I know that have applied for jobs, it's an application form process. You can't just upload a CV or anything like that. And it is very detailed in terms of competencies and behaviours, but all of the information is on the website. So you have to be quite clear on the level you're going in at, don't you, so that you can demonstrate the right things on the form.
And there's loads of stuff out there on the web that you'll find about how to write an application for the civil service. And, you know, the point being is that if I'm thinking about applying for a job now, I still need to go back and be making sure I'm referencing some of that material as well, because you need to get it right. So, yeah, in some ways, the recruitment process is a bit of a bind, but it is absolutely making sure we find the right people in the right jobs.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. All right, so we are really running short of time. I'm just going to quickly ask you about your career highs. So, I mean, it sounds like there's been a lot, but what would you say have been your main highs over your career?
Blimey. I think the ability to be able to work for an organisation that gave me the privilege of going to study at Cambridge is absolutely a career high for me. You know, being able to graduate from Cambridge and be able to take that knowledge back into the prison system and change it has been really important. But I think, you know, it might sound a little bit cliched, but every single day for me is a career high, because every day I know I can affect change for a member of staff, or I can affect change for one of the men in our care. And, you know, genuinely being able to sit back at the end of every day and go, I did this thing today. And I genuinely do that every day. You know, if I finish the day and go, what have I done that's made a difference today or whatever, and I haven't, I do doubly hard tomorrow to go in and try to do that. And, you know, as I say, it's a bit cliched, but, you know, it is genuinely a privilege to come and do what we do. And I think, yeah, I've been given the opportunity to build a career and develop my career and myself through that has genuinely been the place. You know, for a bloke that grew up and left school at 16 with no qualifications to be left in charge of running London prisons feels a little bit sometimes, but, you know, someone's got to do it. So here I am.
Yeah, no, it's really good. And actually, and I think particularly at this time of year when people are starting to think about exam results, I think it's really reassuring that actually, if you don't do as well as you could have done, then, you know, there's still opportunities. It's not the end of the world.
Yeah, I come back full circle with it, Sarah, as well. I think, you know, if you're prepared to work hard and invest in yourself, and, you know, I've studied for numerous qualifications throughout my career, you know, whether it's my CIPD, I have a management diploma, my master's degree. You know, if you're prepared to work hard and put a bit of energy and effort into that, then, you know, you can make anything out of the life and career that you want. So it's really important to say that people are not worrying too much about that stuff.
Yeah, cool. So Paul's just said the CEO of Fulham Reach is going to be his boss in a few weeks. So thank you. And Gautam is saying hello, so thank you for that. All right, so thank you so much, Ian, for joining me. I think I could just talk and ask you questions all afternoon, but I know you've got things to do. So thank you very much. Thank you to anyone that's watching, and I will go through and answer any comments later if anyone's catching up on replay. Next week, I'm back at 1 o'clock again. So I'm going to be talking to Sarah Clay, who is social media strategist and trainer, LinkedIn trainer. So she does similar work to me, actually. So it's going to be interesting to talk to her, although hers is more business and mine's more career, but that's kind of the thing there. So thanks again, and I will see you next time. Thank you.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye.